The day my father's will was read, my brother walked in with a real estate agent. Not a lawyer, not a family friend. A real estate agent with a business card, a tablet, and a smile that hadn't learned yet what kind of room it had just walked into. I want you to hold that image for a second, because everything that happened in the next 3 hours grew from that single moment. My brother Daniel, standing in the doorway of Mr. Patterson's law office, one hand in his pocket, the other gesturing toward a man in a blue blazer like he was introducing a guest at a dinner party. I'll take you back to where this actually started. But first, where are you listening from right now? Drop it in the comments. I genuinely want to know. 3 weeks before that morning, I got a call at 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday. I remember the time because I'd just turned off my lamp. My phone lit up the ceiling. It was my mother. Elena. That was all she said at first. Just my name. And I knew. My father had been sick for 2 years and 11 months. Lung cancer, caught late. I had moved back into my childhood home in Dayton, Ohio, 14 months earlier to help manage his care. I was 31 years old, working remote as a medical billing specialist, and I rearranged my entire life around his medication schedule, his physical therapy appointments, his bad nights, and his increasingly rare good mornings. My brother Daniel lived 40 minutes away in Columbus. He visited 11 times in those 14 months. I counted, because I'm the kind of person who notices things like that when nobody else seems to. My father's name was Raymond. He was 68 years old, a retired electrician who had built most of the shelving in our house with his own hands, and kept a garden in the backyard that he called his retirement project. He was quiet in the way that some men are not cold, just careful with words. He said things once. He didn't repeat himself. And he looked at you with this steadiness that made you feel like whatever you were saying actually mattered to him. He died at 2:14 inches the morning on a Thursday in February. I was in the room. Daniel was not. The next 10 days were the kind of blur that grief makes. I handled the arrangements because that's what I did. I handled things. I called the funeral home. I coordinated with the church. I printed the programs. I made sure there were enough chairs. My mother, Margaret, floated through it all in a kind of suspended state that I understood and didn't hold against her. She and my father had been married for 39 years. She was hollowed out. Daniel showed up the day before the funeral and immediately had opinions about the flower arrangements. I want to be fair here. My brother isn't a monster. He's something more complicated than that. He's a man who has always believed, without examining it too closely, that things would work out for him. He'd made some investments over the past few years that hadn't gone the way he'd planned. He never told me the details and I never pushed. I knew the broad shape of it because my father had mentioned it once, carefully, the way he mentioned things he was worried about. Daniel's gotten himself into something, he'd said. I hope he finds his way out. I didn't know it was $280,000. I found that out later. The will reading was scheduled for 10 days after the funeral, at the office of my father's attorney, Gerald Patterson, who had been handling my father's affairs for over a decade. It was a Thursday morning, 9 a.m. My mother and I drove together. I made coffee in a thermos and she held it in her lap the whole way without drinking any of it. We walked into the waiting room and Daniel was already there. And so was the man in the blue blazer. Daniel stood up when we came in. He smiled. Mom, Elena. Then he gestured to the man beside him. This is Kevin. He's a real estate consultant I've been working with. I thought it made sense to have him here, given the assets involved. I looked at Kevin. Kevin looked at me. Kevin had the particular expression of a man who has been told this would be a smooth situation. Daniel, I said, what is this? It's just practical, he said. The house is the main asset. We're going to need to figure out what to do with it, and it helps to have someone who knows the market. My mother said nothing. She found her chair and sat down. I sat down too. I didn't say anything else because Gerald Patterson had come to the door of his office and was looking at all of us with the expression of a man who had seen many versions of this exact scene and had learned not to react to any of them. Come on in, he said. Kevin came in too. Gerald looked at Kevin. And you are? Kevin Marsh, he said. Real estate. I'm here with Daniel Calloway. Gerald nodded slowly. You're welcome to wait in the reception area, Mr. Marsh. This is a private legal proceeding for family members. Kevin looked at Daniel. Daniel looked at Gerald. Something passed between them. Kevin stayed in the reception area. We settled into the 3 chairs across from Gerald's desk. The office smelled like old paper and carpet cleaner. There was a framed photo of a golden retriever on the bookshelf behind him. Gerald put on his glasses, opened a folder, and looked at each of us once before he began. My father's will was not complicated, he explained, except in the ways that mattered. There were small amounts designated for 2 cousins and a donation to his church. His truck went to Daniel, his tools went to me, because I'd been the one out there with him in the garage since I was 10 years old and we both knew it. And then Gerald said, regarding the property at 4417 Birchwood Drive. Daniel straightened in his chair. Raymond executed a revocable living trust in March of 2019, Gerald said. The property was transferred into that trust at the time of execution. Upon Raymond's passing, the trust became irrevocable. Elena is named as the sole successor trustee and sole beneficiary of the trust. The room was quiet. Daniel said, I'm sorry, what does that mean exactly? Gerald looked at him without any particular expression. It means the house is not part of the estate. It passed directly to Elena through the trust upon your father's death. It does not go through probate. It is not subject to distribution under the will. Daniel's jaw shifted. That can't be right. He never mentioned a trust. He executed it in 2019, Gerald said. It's been in place for 6 years. But the house, Daniel stopped. Started again. We need that house. I mean, the family needs, there are financial considerations that, Daniel. My mother's voice was very quiet. He looked at her. Stop, she said. That single word from her, I haven't forgotten it. I don't think I will. But I need to tell you what happened before that room. Because the will reading wasn't the only moment. It was the loudest moment, but it wasn't the first. The week after the funeral, while we were still in that strange suspended time between grief and logistics, Daniel came to the house. Birchwood Drive, my childhood home. The house my father built the deck on. The house with the garden in the back and the shelves he'd put up in every room. Daniel sat at the kitchen table with a yellow legal pad and started talking about next steps. I was washing dishes. I didn't turn around. The mortgage is paid off, he said. Dad told me that years ago. So whatever we get for it is clean money. Market's decent right now in Dayton. Kevin thinks we could get somewhere between 310 and 340, depending on what we do to stage it. I turned off the faucet. I turned around. We? I said. He looked up. The family. Daniel, Dad hasn't been gone 2 weeks. I know that, Elena. I'm being practical. You're sitting at his kitchen table with a legal pad talking about selling his house. Our house. I looked at him for a long moment. Where's Mom in this conversation? Mom agrees with me. She's already said so. The upkeep on this place is a lot for her to handle alone. It makes sense to sell, take the proceeds, divide them fairly. Fairly, I said, and everyone moves forward. I didn't raise my voice. This is something I want you to understand about me. I have never been someone who wins arguments by being louder. My father was the same way. He used to say that the people who shout the most are usually the ones who know they're wrong. I'm not agreeing to sell, I said. And this conversation is over. Daniel put down his pen. Elena, I have financial obligations that are serious. I'm not asking for charity. I'm asking for what's fair. Dad would have wanted— Don't, I said. Don't tell me what Dad would have wanted. You visited 11 times in 14 months. I was here every day. I know what he wanted. My mother was in the doorway. I don't know how long she'd been standing there. She looked at me with an expression I couldn't fully read, something between guilt and something older than that, something she'd been carrying a long time. Elena, she said, your brother is in a difficult position. I know he is. The house could help. Mom, I stopped, took a breath. I love you, but this is not a conversation I'm going to have right now. Not in this house, not this week. She didn't push, but she also didn't say I was right. That night I called my father's attorney. I'd known Gerald Patterson's name for years. My father mentioned him occasionally, the way you mention someone you trust. I found his number in the folder my father kept in the filing cabinet in his study. The filing cabinet I'd been the one to organize when he got too tired to manage it himself. I called and left a message. He called me back the next morning. Miss Calloway, he said, I was actually planning to reach out to you this week. There are some things we need to discuss before the formal reading. He didn't tell me everything on the phone. He said we should meet in person. But he told me enough. He told me about the trust. He told me it had been established in 2019, that my father had updated the beneficiary designation 2 years ago, and that the house had never been part of the probate estate. I sat at my father's desk in his study, with the phone in my hand for a long time after we hung up. He'd known. He'd done this quietly, years before he got sick, and then he'd updated it once he understood what was coming. He hadn't told me. He hadn't made a speech about it. He'd just done it the way he did everything carefully, without fanfare, because he'd thought it through and he knew what he wanted. I thought about the 11 visits, about the legal pad, about Kevin in the blue blazer. I thought about my father saying, "Daniel's gotten himself into something." I cried for a while. Then I washed my face and went to make dinner. Back in Gerald's office, after he explained the trust, the room stayed quiet for longer than felt comfortable. My mother had her hands folded in her lap, and she was looking at the desk, not at either of us. Daniel said, "There has to be a way to contest this, or..." "The trust is valid," Gerald said, with the patience of a man who has answered this question many times. "It was properly executed, properly funded, and has been in place for 6 years. There is no grounds for contest that I'm aware of. He wasn't in his right mind the last 2 years. The trust was established in 2019, Gerald said. Before his diagnosis, Daniel went quiet. I didn't look at him. I was looking at my mother. She was still looking at the desk. Her hands were still folded. And then she looked up at me. And whatever I'd seen in her face that night in the kitchen doorway, that complicated, layered thing, it had shifted into something simpler. Something that looked a lot like grief, but a different kind than before. The kind that comes from recognizing something you should have seen sooner. "Your father was a careful man," she said. "To me, not to Daniel." "Yes," I said. "He was." We drove home mostly in silence. At one point my mother said, "I didn't know about the trust." "I know," I said. I told him. She stopped. I told him Daniel needed help. A few years ago, when things started going wrong for him financially, your father listened. He always listened. But he didn't always do what I asked. I thought about that. I thought about my father in the garden, moving between the tomato plants, not saying much. I thought about him in the garage, showing me how to read a circuit panel, explaining things once, clearly, and trusting that I'd retained it. "He didn't do what you asked," I said slowly, "because he was protecting me." She was quiet for a moment. "He was protecting the home," she said. "Same thing," I said. She didn't argue with that. My brother called me that evening. I let it go to voicemail. His message was long and covered a lot of ground: frustration, justification, an attempt at an apology that didn't quite land because it was still mostly about what he needed. He said he hoped we could figure something out. He said family was important. He said Dad would have wanted us to work together. I listened to the whole thing. Then I sat down and thought about it seriously, because despite everything, Daniel is my brother and I don't make decisions about people I love without taking them seriously. Here's what I decided. My mother has lived in that house for 31 years. She's 64 years old, and she just lost her husband of 39 years. She's not going anywhere. I arranged for her to stay in the house, contributing what she's able to, for as long as she wants to. That's not a hardship for me. That house is not a burden. It's the place where my father built things with his hands. I intend to take care of it. My brother's debts are his own. I told him this, directly, when I called him back 2 days later. I want to be honest with you, I didn't yell. I didn't rehash everything. I said, "Daniel, I love you. The house is mine. I'm not selling it. Your debt is not my emergency. I hope you find a way through it, and I'll help where I actually can, but I won't be leveraged by it." He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "How can you be so calm about this?" And I said, "Because Dad raised me to be." There's a thing that happens when you're the one who stayed. When you're the one who rearranged your life, tracked the medication schedule, drove to appointments in the rain, held someone's hand at 2 inches the morning. People sometimes treat your presence as evidence that you had nothing better to do. Like the sacrifice only counts if you performed it loudly. My father didn't see it that way. He saw what I gave and he said thank you, in the only language he really spoke: practical, permanent, written into the legal record and witnessed by a notary. He didn't give me the house because I was the good child. He gave it to me because he trusted me to know what to do with it. My mother and I are still finding our footing. It's not easy. There are days when I see her looking at the backyard and I know she's somewhere else entirely. Somewhere 30 years back. Somewhere I can't follow her. I bring her tea and I sit nearby and I don't force conversation. We are learning, slowly, to be in the same room without my father as the center of it. She said something to me last week, while we were sitting on the back deck, his deck, the one he built the summer I was 9 years old. She said, I should have listened to him more. About a lot of things. I said, he wasn't easy to argue with. She almost smiled. No, he wasn't. The garden is still there. Most of it overwintered better than I expected. There are things coming up already. Garlic he planted in October, which means he knew he was planting it for someone else to harvest. I think about that a lot. I think about him out there in the fall, pressing bulbs into the cold ground, knowing. He said things once. He didn't repeat himself, but sometimes, if you were paying attention, he said them in ways that lasted. I hope, wherever you are right now, that you have someone in your corner like that. Someone who shows up not with speeches but with paperwork filed in the right office 6 years before you needed it. And I hope that if you're the one who stayed, the one who showed up, the one who handled things, I hope you know that it counted. Even when no one said so. Even before the lawyer opened the folder, it counted. If this story meant something to you, I'd love to know. Leave a comment, share where you're watching from, and if you know someone who needed to hear this today, send it their way. I'll be here for the next one.